small piece of work about the voice of young people in their drug and alcohol education. And Patrick was working for Durham at the time, County Council, and was a advisor on schools, drugs and alcohol, and possibly other things as well. And he set me up with two fantastic schools. One where the school council had been involved in drafting their school's drug and alcohol programme, and another where they'd implemented a programme that he'd had a large part in writing, if not the sole part in writing. And it's the Just for a Laugh programme that he's going to talk to us about in a bit. I think that kind of Patrick is like a lot of people in this field, in that you work in a very, it's a small, local-based project which is trying to reach schools in your area rather than a national deliverer who comes along and offers something kind of fairly unique.
We're happy to deliver nationally,
of course.
That's the opportunity.
Sure. No, I don't want to limit your ambitions, Patrick, but I think you're like a lot of other people, but it's going to be fascinating to hear, because I know that you're kind of really passionate about the evidence. I know you're passionate about the experience that young people and teachers have in teaching young people about health. And it'd be really interesting to hear what Patrick's got to say about how he engages with evidence and how his programme has been developed around what he's learned in all of those years that we've been working together about drugs and alcohol.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for staying. Yes, my name's Patrick Hargreaves. Yeah, I met Andrew initially working for Durham as drugs and alcohol advisor. Prior to that, I've worked in both primary and secondary sectors and special education, informal education and youth clubs. And I ran a pupil referral unit for permanently excluded 14 to 16-year-olds for about 5 years. And that was where I particularly became interested in this area of risk, drugs and alcohol. Most of the young people with whom I worked were all running into problems around the drug and alcohol use and their risk-taking behaviour. The title for the project actually comes from the many discussions that I would have with young people, asking them, you know, why ever did you do that? And a very common response was, just for a laugh, it's a laugh. So I sort of took that and used that as the title of the project. So it's coming from the young people straight away, really, their responses and their views about risk-taking. So today I'll go through the programme quickly, and then talk a little about evaluation, and then I'll end by showing a short DVD clip of some of the dramas that the children and young people have come up with as a result of doing this work in schools. You're all PSHE teachers, so you'll all be well aware about ground rules around behaviour and respect and so on. But an important area, particularly we're talking about offending behaviour, drug and alcohol work, any area where we're looking at very personal feelings. Young children, young people, and indeed adults must be protected around disclosing information that may well be used against them, if you like. Information that's going to compromise them, information that could find its way, particularly these days, onto social networking sites, mobile phones and so on. So it's really important that we maintain confidentiality, and that's very important to get across to the children and young people right from the start. The next area that we consider is needs analysis. It's really important that we find out from the children and the young people where they're at, what the issues are that are affecting cutting down. Now, a criticism that was often levelled of bad drug education was that it put ideas into young people's minds. And sure, if you walk into a nursery school and say, "Hi kids, we're going to talk about ecstasy," the first thing that's going to happen is they'll want to be taking it, they'll want to try it. So it's very much about pitching the work that you're doing at the right level for the children and young people with whom you're working. Really important to get the needs analysis right. I think Lucy's point as well about the spiralling curriculum. This is an important idea as well about getting the right place at the right time. Now, she mentioned the differences between talking to a Year 8 student and a Year 10 student. Absolutely, there will be very real differences. The content and the level of discussion will be very different. So it's very much about the young people leading the content of the lesson. Okay. Someone mentioned before about facts and skills and which was more important or which we need to be teaching around. They're both really important. You need facts to be able to perfect the skills to deal with them. Of course, facts in drugs and alcohol sometimes is up for doubt. So straight away we're into an area where few people have all the answers. So for this reason, we get the children and young people to research in small groups and discuss, research whatever it is that they're wanting to consider. It could well be alcohol. All of these questions and all of these media can be used, but then very importantly, your ideas. You want what the children or young people think. Now the reason that this is important is because if you don't invite views to be aired in the classroom, they're going to be aired in the playground or on the field or wherever. So invite the views into the classroom, and then the whole group can discuss them and decide if that is a good idea. They might be able to flag up problems and so on. So it's very much about creating a forum for children and young people to discuss behaviours that are relevant for them and behaviours that they might participate in. Now, to illustrate how we can use exactly the same input with any child, so I'm talking about 4 or 5-year-olds right up to 18+-year-olds. Because the children and young people dictate the content, we can make this intervention relevant for anybody, okay? And we can revisit it year on year or every other year or however often we need to. These different risky behaviours these two here were both elicited from very young children, nursery school children and Key Stage 1 children. They came up with the ideas. So, for instance, the nursery school children came up with things like a knife, scissors, a boiling kettle. What might be dangerous? Key Stage 1 children came up with these: eating too many sweets, going to the park on your own, going to the park without telling your carer, taking 2 of your dad's pills. Whatever it might be, they identify it, so they dictate the curricular content. They then work on making a presentation around the risks, around what might happen, but also including their ideas. Now, if I can just go on to explain that. What we often do in risk education is we talk about behaviour and we talk about consequences. So if you do this, that'll happen. The real education goes on here rather than here. This is where we need to be working. So we need to work on decision making. Why does someone decide to do a certain thing? And what might the consequences be? This is so often omitted in educational interventions, and it's arguably the most important of all of them. So we're looking at decision making and trying to engender decision making skills in children and young people together, so that they're informing each other's decisions and choices. The other thing, of course, about drugs and alcohol and risk is that they don't happen in isolation. So, you know, drinking half a lager with your parents, with a meal, is different from drinking a bottle of vodka in the park with your mates. Now, we all know that, but, you know, the substance is the same, so we shouldn't be talking just about a substance. We need to talk about the whole environment and culture around that substance. Now, that's also where, when we're looking at scenario development, we find that the youngsters don't, and scenarios don't look at a particular behaviour or issue in isolation. Alcohol consumption may well impact on your relationships. It may impact on bullying, sexual health. So these all happen together, and the only way of addressing risk behaviour is to look at the behaviour within a social, cultural context. So that's another very important element. The use of drama. Now, drama, you know, we've gone through now the fact-finding, the scenario development, and then we move into drama. Now, drama often frightens teachers. I know it did me. I mean, I wasn't a drama teacher until I worked with a drama consultant. I managed to glean some skills. Now, I couldn't direct a Shakespeare play, but I can do pieces of drama with children and young people in schools. I can take them through some exercises that are really good for developing thinking skills and decision making and risk analysis. So, you know, we can, all teachers, or all teachers, if they can teach, they can use drama to get ideas out of young people. Children and young people, by and large, I mean, I've never really come across children and young people that once they have got over the initial resistance, don't love doing it. Most children and young people get a lot out of it and really like it. So simple drama skills. Now, to return to the importance of confidentiality, with drama you're always working in the third person. You're always working in an imaginary situation. Now, strangely, through doing that you will often get very much closer to the truth, because the young people don't feel they have to show off, they don't worry about disclosing, but they can then explore in a very honest way their own feelings, but in the safety of a piece of drama. And when you actually work through dramas with young people, you can see where they're really thinking through issues that are very real to them in a safe way. They're learning through the process of the drama. I mean, one of the things that you will do would be hot seating, for instance, where someone takes the role of one of the protagonists in the drama, and questions are asked, and then so they imagine what that person might say. So you look into the other, right? You look into the other's feelings. Again, an important issue, particularly for young children. I mean, young children have a very underdeveloped sense of the other. So part of our socialisation is to work around that. All right, of the intervention, I mean, this is the kind of things that that we get back in evaluations that we've had. I mean, the children and people enjoy it. They say they feel more confident, they're more aware of risks, and so on and so forth. And then the teachers said that it can be regularly practiced. Anyone can participate and actually do well. Many teachers have used the same techniques across the curriculum, and everyone enjoyed it. Okay, so that, which again is important. If I can just go back to a slide, I forgot really to mention in this ladder of risk. Yeah, the other important element about the ladder of risk that I mentioned in the introduction, but not there, is that there aren't any right or wrong answers. The task here, if you like, is to order these different elements from high risk down to low risk. Now, if we look at the one that's particularly around substances, okay, you could argue that paracetamol is more dangerous than heroin because it's very cheap, it's very available, it will kill you if you have too many. Well, heroin's not that available, you know, arguably to many young people. It's cheap, maybe for us, but for the young people it's going to be expensive. So that's not going to cause them as much danger, if you like, or it won't be as risky as something like paracetamol. So these can be ordered in any way. Experts would differ in how they ordered them, and if you did this yourself, you would probably come up with a different order the next day. So the important thing here is the process, and throughout this project actually it's always the process that's important. So that's a sort of illustration of how things don't have to be right. We're all thinking together and solving problems together. So it's just considering the options, and this is a way of actually getting young people to consider options and then come to a decision that's right for them. The last thing that I want to just finish on before we go on to, I'll show you, as I say, a few short montage of clips of some of the young people's work. And you'll see from that, you know, it starts off with a nursery group and goes right up to, I remember the sixth form group on the film, but goes up to year 11 students. So you'll see how that can work. I mean, the thing about evaluation, or one of the things about evaluation, is of course there's so much confounding data around. I mean, there are incidental things that will happen at the same time as the work that you're doing. There are unplanned effects which you hadn't really thought about that might happen. But those sort of confounding variables don't mean that the work isn't valuable. You know, it's often very, very difficult to measure impact from a piece of work. And I know that, you know, the speakers before have talked about how their evaluation is pretty watertight. But there are still things going on that you can't control. You know, drug education happens in school, it happens in college, it happens in youth clubs, it happens in the family, and it happens with friends. So there's a lot of vicarious education going on as well, which don't help to make your sample sort of completely unrelated to what's going on. So we're not working in a laboratory. There are other issues around, you know, most of the evaluations are worked around self-report questionnaires. Again, you know, they're notoriously unreliable. Self-report questionnaires, often, particularly if it's in a school, youngsters may give the answer that they think you want, or indeed the answer that they think you don't want. You know, all of these things can also impact on what they're actually saying, and then what the evaluators find. But I think the crucial evidence, which was mentioned by one of the speakers earlier, was many of the behaviour changes may be actually very subtle. So, say a young person goes drinking in the park on a Friday night. Now, if because of something that you've done, or something that you've worked on together, if the impact of that means that they have 4 cans of lager rather than 5 cans of lager and a quart bottle of vodka, then that's an impact. But of course they still go to the park drinking. So if the question is phrased, do you drink in the park on your own? The answer's still going to be yes. So you've got to be very, very careful about the questions and what you can extrapolate from the data. So very subtle behaviour changes, patterns of usage, styles of usage, who you're doing it with and where. So those all have to be addressed as well, which is a problem for evaluators. One of the big issues around evaluation is the near absence of any longitudinal data. Now, Claire Chatfield from Crime Concern actually said that when you're working with 13-year-olds, it can be 10 years before you see the impact, right? And there have been a number of studies that have shown exactly that. That have shown that you can have interventions around reading at year 5 and 6. And there's not very much impact until you look at offending data at 16, 17, 18. Now, there's very few studies that go over that length of time. But it's another issue really for when you're evaluating projects. The other thing, of course, is around, if we're looking at risk and drugs and alcohol, it could well be that the young people themselves don't actually want to curtail their cannabis use. So when they're 14 and 15, they're not interested. But however, they're still going through the thinking process and decision making. When they are able or ready to make those decisions later, they've got the information that you've worked on with them. So they know the decision-making areas, they know the issues. So when they make the decision that they want to change, they know how to change. So that also is important, and that's not going to get measured on very many evaluations. So it's a cautionary note really about evaluation and about, you know, it's not smoke and mirrors, but it's like this sort of this scientific, social science approach, and a lot of this isn't scientific, and it's very, very difficult to measure. What I would say, I mean, that finally, and just before we have a look at the film, is when I work with Durham, and I actually work, I'm a school inspector now, so I'm waiting for the brick bus, if you like. When I worked for Durham, I was one of the hundreds of drug and alcohol and sexual relationships advisors that were attached to local authorities. Now 2 years ago, the funding for that wound up. Interestingly, now I think there are some interesting statistics or evaluations to be had here. Over those 10 years, we know that smoking, alcohol and drug use among young people fell consistently year on year. We know that teenage pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases fell year on year. I hope that we're not going to see those rising again without that input in local authorities. Yesterday, I read that the latest NHS statistics show that over the last 2 years, smoking rates among children have increased, bucking the trend of the last 10 years. Now, I think that's a real concern, serious concern, that there aren't people attached to local authorities basically pushing schools and finding stuff to give to schools to actually to maintain this area on the curriculum. I hope we're not going to see this right across the drug, alcohol and risk-taking areas, but I'm afraid that we might. You know, and this at a time, you know, we must remember that the time where this actually happened, we effected these changes to a background of cheap, very, very cheap alcohol, an explosion in the availability of legal highs, a real issue for youngsters and for us all. And this, you know, sort of moral panic about the sexualisation of children. Now, against that backdrop, we still managed to reduce numbers, so there was something that we were doing right. And unfortunately, you know, there are a lot of avenues have been closed, and I just hope that colleagues from the DFE may consider that. You know, it shows really that there is no room at all for complacency. We have to keep at this. We have to keep up our input with young people. There is, I think, you know, still an over-reliance on enforcement and tax hikes to influence behaviour, and that's, you know, I really think that we need to keep investment in education, and I know that you're always equally passionate about that. Okay, I mean, there's a number of evaluations here of the project, from Mentor, Home Office, Investing in Children, PSHE Association, and I'm happy to sort of answer any questions or have any discussions with anybody.